Everyone goes through life with a set of goals, like completing a college degree, learning a new language, or achieving a high rank in a video game. We try our best every day to complete these goals, but it's inevitable that sometimes we'll fall short. Failure is a certainty. We all know that. So, as soon as we're old enough to read, we start getting these cliche phrases imprinted into our brains. You know the ones. The path to success isn't a straight line. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. If you don't succeed, try again. The message is clear. If you fail, just pick yourself back up. Keep trying, and one day you'll get it. Easy. Except it's never that easy. Especially if you have invested a lot of time, effort, or money into something. In that case, failure is crushing. Those resources are gone. Wasted. People say that you have more knowledge the next time around, but sometimes that's not even true. Sometimes you fail and you have no idea why it happened. It leaves you feeling lost and confused, and finding the motivation to try again is a Herculean task. But you have to pick yourself back up. It's either that or wallow in your own self-pity forever, and that gets boring after a couple of months. Case in point, the Shanghai Dragons, who went into Season 1 of the Overwatch League with a simple goal: win. And they failed miserably. Let's see how they picked themselves up. You probably already know the story of the Shanghai Dragons in Season 1, but so I can make sure I cover all my bases, let's tell it again. Shanghai went into Overwatch League Season 1 as the only Chinese representatives, which put a lot of expectations on them. Most people thought that they would heavily recruit from a team called Miraculous Youngster, who pre-Overwatch League were considered the best Chinese team. However, the Dragons ignored MY entirely, instead picking up different Chinese names from all over the region from teams with varying levels of success. This was a big risk, and from the very beginning it was clear that Shanghai's scouting wasn't great. They were several steps behind everyone. The Dragons' early season was filled with allegations of corruption within the staff, controversies with their players, and just generally not being as good at the game. The team eventually brought on some new additions that looked promising, but it was too little too late. Most of the new additions were Koreans trying to join a Chinese team, and incorporating a new language was just too much.
Infraside, he can now see through those walls, and he's looking for Dia. Dia fake peeks one side and now goes for the other, and Logix is going to be having to get out of here. Awesome guys removed by that pulse bomb, but Zemicide brings it back. Dia's down to Logix here, 97%, we're getting close. Shanghai have to make the difference here, but it seems it's going to be a little bit too much, a pipe dream perhaps. There it is, overtime. Fearless has to throw himself for the point, but the Florida Mayhem stand tall against the odds. And the Shanghai Dragons, beloved Dragons, today is not your day, but when it is, it will be sweet.
The Dragons finished Season 1 with 0 wins and 40 losses. To put that into perspective, the longest recorded losing streak in professional sports is 28, set by the Philadelphia 76ers in 2015. The Dragons were a laughingstock and a total disappointment to an entire region. That is, until China's silver medal in the Overwatch World Cup later that year proved that they could compete at an international level. The Dragons were now faced with a choice. This roster had come close to their first win several times. They could stay the course and focus on improving what they had, or they could blow it all up and start from scratch. They chose the latter, cutting their losses and almost everybody. Seriously, they cut 8 players in one tweet, and later a 9th would join them. Was this the right move? Yeah. While the Season 1 roster had flash potential, it was only against some of the worst or inconsistent teams in the league. For the most part, the Dragons just got wiped over and over again. And while they could probably get a few wins in Season 2, they couldn't realistically compete for a playoff spot, let alone a title. It was time to try again. There were only 2 survivors from Season 1. The first was Gregory. One of the late season pickups, Gregory's off-tank play, especially on D.Va, was one of the best parts of the team in the latter half of the season. Of course, when we're talking about Gregory, it has to be mentioned that she is the first and currently only woman playing in Overwatch League. As much as she tries to downplay that, she's a PR magnet all the same with her frog mascot and love of puns. The second was Dia, the last OG member of the Dragons. Since day one, his hit scan was the best thing about Shanghai. Even with the shaky infrastructure around him, Dia still managed to find ways to pop off and carry his team through fights on heroes like Widow, McCree, and Tracer. Keeping him around makes sense just due to his mechanical skill alone. But of course, the Dragons had an entire team to build, so they got to work. And when the Dragons announced their 6 newest members, it was obvious what their plan was. They had learned the hard way how difficult it was to get a team of unfamiliar players to band together. They wanted a group of people who had played with each other before, an established core that they could build around. And they got it. Flex player Youngjin, Flex DPS Ding, main support Koma, and Flex support Luffy all came from the Kangdu Panthera team that was just one map away from defeating Runaway in the finals of Contenders Korea 2018 Season 2. Runaway, of course, would go on to become the Vancouver Titans. This was a huge deal. Not only did Shanghai get their core, but their core was experienced and had found success on the biggest stages in Overwatch not called the Overwatch League. It was a great first step, and now the Dragons started to fill in the rest of the holes on the roster. First up is Guardian, an off-tank player formerly from Toronto Esports. While not a big-name free agent, Guardian was a member of the team that came in second place in NA Contenders Season 1, and was even a part of the prestigious Lunatic High. 2. No, while he had never played with legends like Miro and Jaehong, you might recognize names like Bunny and Alarm, and he would have qualified for the 5th season of Apex, if there was a 5th season. But he's found a lot of success in Tier 2 without ever really breaking into the big time, so maybe now was his chance. Next, Diem, who was a fairly big name as the hitscan DPS star of Lucky Future Zenith. This team was dominating Chinese contenders, winning 2 seasons in a row prior to Overwatch League. Diem also had a fun backstory as an old friend of Carpe, Fusion superstar Hitscan. They've known each other for so long that they came up with matching gamer tags to make the classic Latin phrase, Carpe Diem. They had gone off on their separate ways, individually walked the path to pro, and now they had met back up in Overwatch League. Diem's hitscan abilities were feared by many, and as the season went on, he would prove why that was the case. And finally, to fill the all-important main tank slot, it was Gamsu. As a part of the Boston Uprising in Season 1, Gamsu wasn't known to be the best player, but what he lacked in skill, he made up for with his calm demeanor, being an emotional rock for his team in a rough period. Without Gamsu, who knows if they would have been able to pull their miraculous Stage 3 run. However, as president of Gaming Huck would explain in a postseason Q&A, the Uprising were planning on going in a different direction for Season 2.
But then we're in this complicated situation, right? Now then we have Gamsu, Axiom, Fusions. Main tank, I think, more than almost any other role, or probably more than any other role, you really want it to just be consistent. After Axiom beat out Gamsu, Fusions and Axiom kind of fought for that starting position. Fusions ended up waiting out.
So the options were to be a third string main tank for the Uprising, or to start for the Dragons. The choice is clear. Gamsu's veteran presence on Shanghai would prove to be instrumental to any success they would have. So going into Season 2, the Dragons looked a lot better, though looking worse than Season 1 would be impressive. However, most analysts still would rank them somewhere in the middle of the pack. Despite getting a great core in KDP, they were missing 2 of their most dynamic players from that time period, Roar and Decay, who ended up going to the Gladiators instead. We weren't sure if Gamsu and Diem would be able to fill those holes effectively, but more importantly, there was just a general lack of trust in the organization. After watching them blow chance after chance to get their first win last year, there was a feeling of dread that they would somehow, someway mess it up. There was no way to get this feeling to disappear other than to break the curse. The first week of matches for the Dragons didn't do them any favors, that's for sure. They were up against 2 teams who were rated much higher than them in the Hangzhou Spark and the Vancouver Titans. Both of these games were losses, but a map win against the Spark gave fans hope. Then came the fateful day of February 23rd, 2019, when the Dragons were slated to play against the Boston Uprising, Gamsu's former team, and one that, on paper, the Dragons had a very good chance of beating. And when they took the stage, this team showed a confidence that had never been present before.
She makes it back though, looking for the knockdown. Color Hex, welcome to the Overwatch League. Say goodnight. He goes off the side. Axiom now going to get dropped, and the Shanghai Dragons are slaughtering Boston Uprising. To be able to close that out with the defense, but oh man, Hoofy is going to be taking out Aim God now. A hack over onto Axiom. Not going to be able to get a kill onto him yet, but they're pushing forward. Now they're going to be looking for it. Now DM will be able to come up with it. Dollar Hex, half HP, retreating over onto the point, but there's nowhere really to run. No one is safe from Luffy.
The Dragons were a bit more unorthodox than most, not immediately pledging themselves to the Church of Goats. Instead, they experimented with some disruption comps that took advantage of Sombra and Wrecking Ball. Maybe this caught Boston off guard. Also, to be fair, there were some miscommunications about two-way contracts that forced the team to play Axiom at main tank instead of Fusions like they planned at the last second. And because of that, it felt like they started the series on the back foot and just couldn't recover until it was too late. As the Dragons went up 1-0 and then 2-0, the entire community held their breath, hardly believing that it could be possible. But then it happened.
Tick, gonna be gained.
You can feel it.
Almost there, pushing from the back. They're ticking up again. No, it's gonna be hacked. He's gonna be taken out of the mech. Finished off.
It's happening.
This could be at the second tick. Getting ready to come through. Kelix gonna be eliminated. Transcendence is out from Aim God, but it's gonna expire. They will be able to finish him off.
There you go.
They're gonna get it. Just a couple more percent to go. Let them have it, Boston. Axiom, top of the primal rage, but it does not matter. Ladies and gentlemen, history has been made. The Shanghai Dragons, on the 43rd attempt out, managed to pick up their first match victory.
592 days after the franchise was announced, after 42 losses in a row, the Shanghai Dragons had broken the curse. Right there, just with that, the rebuild was worth it. The new Dragons roster had achieved what their old Season 1 counterparts never could, and the Dragons would go on to add 2 more wins this stage against the Hunters and the Spitfire of all teams. Yeah, the basement dwellers of Season 1 taking down the reigning champs. It was one of the biggest early indicators that anything could happen this season. However, that doesn't mean that the Dragons were without flaw. Gamsu was transferred to Shanghai just a few days before the start of the season, so they played like a team that had to insert a crucial piece last minute. Learning to play with him and around him took a bit of time. Also, the team weren't too sure what to do about the off-tank slot. Goats was a very unique meta where off-tank players were actually expected to be more flexible instead of just D.Va bots. This was because D.Va is the least important member of the standard Goats comp. Sure, the pressure that she can bring with her rocket booster, her damage, and her defense matrix are extremely helpful, but the comp can survive just fine without it, and if they want to trade her out for the utility of a Sombra, a Mei, or even a Reaper, well, why wouldn't they? So while Gaguri may have had the best D.Va on the team, it may have been more beneficial for an experimenting team like the Dragons to go with a more flexible player in that spot like Youngjin. The Dragons just weren't sure what direction to go in yet, and that stunted their abilities early. The Dragons had proved that they deserved to be there, but a 3-4 record shows that there was still a lot of work to do. Congrats, Dragons! You got your win! You've proved your worth, and you've made history, and blah blah blah, no one cares anymore. The Dragons were no longer the massive underdogs just soaking up a community's pity. They wanted you to respect them, and they set out to do just that. Hey look, the Dragons have finally decided whether Goats is good or bad. It's bad, they decided, and would no longer run Goats unless it was on maps where they absolutely had to. Unfortunately, this would mean Gaguri took more of a bench role after Stage 1, but it was for the best with the strategies that they wanted to run. The Dragons would rely a lot on Sombra to put in work. Sombra's ability to disrupt in this meta is unmatched. Being able to deny an entire team with one button press that she can build up in about a minute? I mean, come on. Shanghai committed to this style, as well as practiced some other disruption comps that took advantage of Ding's deadly Pharah. While they weren't able to take down any top teams like the NYXL or the Gladiators, lesser teams that weren't prepared to deal with them fell fairly easy. and a 4-3 record was actually enough for the Dragons to qualify for the stage playoffs. Yes, they barely made it in, and yes, they were just a minor inconvenience to a devastating Shock team that were on their way to a championship, but even getting there was a massive achievement for this franchise. Let's put it this way, just by making this stage playoffs, the Dragons are officially more successful as a franchise than these teams who haven't been in a playoff yet. The Dragons were trending upwards, and the results of their work were starting to show, but they still weren't considered to be one of the league's top teams. At least, not yet. During the mid-season break, the Dragons made a roster change by letting go of Guardian. This made a lot of sense, as Guardian had only played a couple of maps for the Dragons. They weren't using D.Va much anyways, and when they were, they would just put in Gregory. Simply put, Guardian didn't really have a place on the team, so letting him go seemed logical. Filling his spot, however, was Envy. The former Toronto Defiance D.Va player had proved his worth in the first stages of the season, but after a change in mentality for Toronto that led them to utilize more Western talent, he ended up moving over to Shanghai. With that out of the way, the Dragons spent Stage 3 continuing to refine their strategies, and one by one, other teams began to join them. At this point, most lower tier teams understood that they would never beat teams like the Shock or the Titans or the NYXL in a mirror matchup. Therefore, Sombra saw a huge increase in usage in Stage 3 as everyone tried to catch them off their guards, and the Dragons were way ahead of the curve. It would be rare to see them play D.Va at this point. Ding or DM were now on Sombra duty, almost full time. Speaking of DM, Shanghai let him spread his wings a little bit on the Widowmaker, and he did not disappoint.
No fun there. Neptuno, trying to take measures in his own end, but DM finding the picks, and Shanghai Dragons with another. The Mercy boost, plus the supercharge, that's a ton of damage, but it doesn't matter if DM finds your head. Luffy down as well, DM finds another one.
Shanghai put in their strongest performance yet, going 5-2, which would qualify them for the stage playoffs once again, as the 8th seed once again. Yeah, the competition was strong this stage, and once again the Dragons would go up against the number 1 seed, which was NYXL, who were coming off of a perfect 7-0 stage themselves and were feeling and looking great. Unfortunately, it looked like it would be another early exit for...
But he is the last man standing between Shanghai and a semifinal spot, and he will drop. And that is it. The Shanghai Dragons are going to the semis.
Okay, fine, so the NYXL choked in the playoffs again. Big deal. But the Titans would be different. They had made the stage finals twice in a row, and they won stage 1. Unlike the NYXL, they could play under pressure. Nothing was going to stop them from a third trip to...
Him is not in this anymore, but so is soon. What's he getting out of this visor? He sees a target, he's hunting for it, and it's not going to happen. The Shanghai Dragons Hex!
That one was unexpected. But if anyone could stop this, it was the Shock. They struggled a little bit in this stage, but in their first 2 playoff games, they've looked in top form once again. The most clutch team in Overwatch League was looking for 2 stage championships in a row, and they were going to...
DM is going for the fight. He's got Sinatra, and Koma scoops in, gets that tag team battle. They take him out. Rez comes back in, super back into the fight, but a Bionate on the trio, but now with the barrage layered in, means they all get taken down. It is just Moth by himself, trying to buy time, but he cannot do it. No one is close. The cart's starting to advance, a Wrecking Ball on the way, but I don't think he's gonna arrive in time, and he will not. Reverse sweep, not gonna happen. The Shanghai Dragons, for the first time, will be your Stage 3 champions.
The Blizzard Arena glowed red. Shanghai wins rolled across the screens. The Dragons had pulled off the most improbable bracket run we've ever seen in Overwatch League, coming in as the 8th seed, taking down the 3 most powerful teams in Overwatch at the time. How? Well, DM showed off his Widowmaker, Youngjin got his moments to shine on Doomfist, but the person to talk about here is Ding, because he was the star of the show. One of the most obvious counters to a comp like GOATS is just play Pharah. No one in a standard GOATS composition has the range to consistently take her down. And while that might be true, the simple answer is that while Pharah can do a bunch of poke damage, the self-sustain and shielding in GOATS makes it very hard for her to finish off any kills. In the end, it's just ult charge for the supports. But If you add in a Sombra or Widowmaker, take their eyes off the sky for just a minute, well, what happened was some of the best far play we've ever seen.
Another jump here onto the high ground. Super goes forward, but gets stunned up. The EMP comes in, and Ding, he rains down hell from above. Down. Ding, not really into a position to use the barrage, but also not going to be necessary. The boot forward, it's both supports. A lot of damage coming through. That's going to be the nano boost into the barrage. An instant 2 kills coming in. Architect,
He's back, he's still got the barrage.
another hook this time going to be canceled. There it is. The barrage comes in. 2 lined up, make it 3 as Super gets taken down. Bubbles used. Yeah, they are aware of that now. Pops in this time, and now Rascal and Sinatra. Then Cousin Blast, are able to find a barrage. It's just going to be layered in. Tries to find a killer. Actually, finally going to be taken down. Gets a follow-up again on the Rascal.
The Nano EMP barrage became a staple of Shanghai's playbook, and no one could stop it. The Dragons just did such a good job of enabling Ding, and then following through on the openings he created. If it wasn't Ding, it was DM or Youngjin popping off. You just couldn't shut down all of them. Everything came together for the Dragons, and the perennial underdogs finally stood at the top of the mountain as your Stage 3 champions. Unfortunately, all of the momentum that the Dragons were riding at the end of Stage 3 came to a screeching halt right here. Between Stages 3 and 4, the Dragons signed Izayaki to the team from the LA Valiant, who had shown a lot of talent in the early parts of the season on Zenyatta and Ana, but after their major mid-season rebuild, he ended up being benched for Karuv. Going into a role-lock meta, the Dragons were pinned as one of the most likely candidates to succeed due to their familiarity with DPS comps, and I mean, they just won the last stage. There was no reason to think that they wouldn't at least be good, but they weren't good. If I can theorize what went wrong, I would say it was due to the Dragons prioritizing skill over synergy. When it came for Shanghai to run a true off-tank for the first time in months, which was already a big shift for them, Envy got the starting nod over Gregory. While you can definitely argue that Envy is mechanically better, Gregory has been with this team since day one. The one stage that Envy had here, where he barely saw any playtime, just didn't feel like enough to build the same level of coordination. Even more surprising was when the Dragons put Izayaki in for Luffy at the start of the stage, just a week after he had been signed. No, Luffy isn't the top Overwatch League flex support, but he was good and he did his job well. The Dragons had proven just 2 weeks ago that they could win with him, so why mess that up? While the Dragons realized their mistake and put Luffy back in after just a game or two, Envy stayed, and Shanghai just never looked comfortable. They couldn't lean on their Pharah or Sombra like before, and as the Dragons took loss after loss, their Stage 3 victory was starting to look more like a miracle than anything else. Shanghai would finish out the season with an abysmal 1-6 record, taking losses to teams way below them like the Defiant and the Eternal. However, due to their solid performances in Stages 1 through 3, the Dragons still managed to finish in 11th place overall, just enough to qualify for the play-ins. While the Dragons would be massive underdogs once again, they had earned themselves a ticket to the postseason, and at this point, anything could happen. But the Dragons would not be able to put together another miracle. To their credit, they did take down the Fusion in round 1. Youngjin had a good performance on Doomfist and Envy Sigma was decent, but honestly, except for Poco, the Fusion just didn't look good that series. However, the Dragons would go down in round 2 against the Spitfire in an incredibly close 8-map series. The first one of those in Overwatch League, by the way. If you want an idea of how close the Dragons were to making it to the double elimination bracket, look at this. Map 8, round 1 victory, 99% to 0. It was for sure a heartbreaker for the Kangdu Panthera core, who prior to Overwatch League had lost the Contenders Finals in another 8-map series. But unfortunately for them, the Spitfire clutched out when they really needed to, and the Shanghai Dragons bowed out of Overwatch League Season 2 in 9th place overall. Compared to the pitiful basement dwellers that they were just a year before, Shanghai more than proved their worth to the rest of the league this time around. They failed hard in Season 1, but they learned from a lot of their mistakes, started over, and found success. They qualified for 2-stage playoffs, won one of them, and qualified for the overall playoffs. That's more than a lot of teams can say. But the season wasn't even close to perfect. Other than their miracle Stage 3 playoff bracket run, the Dragons spent the entire season either being average or below average. Yeah, the Dragons were consistently improving through stages 1 through 3, but any momentum that they had fell apart in Stage 4, and Shanghai ended Season 2 with a losing record overall. Their performance in the playoffs, while not awful, could have been way better. If they had won one more fight and gotten themselves into the double elimination bracket, well, who knows. But at the end of the day, this season for the Shanghai Dragons should be viewed as a success and a huge step forward for the franchise. That's why my final rating for the Shanghai Dragons in Season 2 of Overwatch League is a B-. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed reliving Shanghai's season with me. If you liked the video, leave a like. And if you're excited to see more SiRs in the future, make sure to subscribe with notifications on so you don't miss a single upload. Speaking of that, where will we be going next? The Yada Chads themselves. I don't know if I'll be able to handle the raw power that this team possesses, but I will try my hardest. Until then, don't get tilted.